Harry! Harry! Clyde? Harry! What? Where are you? Are you far away or are you inside something? Harry! The garage, Harry! Come to the garage! Clyde? Where are you? In the MOW shed, Harry! Are you gonna have an identical cab and say that's really from an SP engine like Carl a few weeks ago? Just open the garage door, Harry. Just open the garage door. I promise you won't regret it. The payoff is huge. I turned myself into a fiber optic cable laying machine, Harry! Boom! Big reveal! I'm a cable laying machine. What do you think about that? And what more do you want tacked onto this? I turned myself into an obscure piece of maintenance equipment that almost no one knows about, and Pennsylvania needs to make an intro to properly introduce it to a new chapter in the channel's history. But rebrands and YouTube channels happen every day. Here's something that's never happened before. I'm a fiber optic cable laying car. I'm Cable Clyde! Maintenance of way. The one division of rolling stock that absolutely does not care about looks, and sometimes wants to make you say, what did they do to this perfectly good GP38? But despite their alien looks, MOW vehicles play rather underrated but very necessary roles in keeping the railroad running, as unsung heroes of the rail industry, with each machine having its own unique purpose. Likewise, it's usually pretty common for older engines that were displaced from mainline duties to be assigned to maintenance duties, with some engines being outright purchased by MOW companies where they're modified to fit their specific needs, but most engines usually remain as self-propelled units, even if the rest of their appearance is drastically different. That is, except for this engine. Despite the general consensus as to what certain maintenance cars should look like, one small MOW company purchased a surplus 6-axle road freight engine and used its frame to entirely rebuild it into an unpowered fiber optic cable layer at the turn of the 21st century. This is a little-known story of NLLX number 2100, also known as Clyde, or the engine that turned into a fiber optic cable laying machine. But before we go back in time to the 1980s and retell the same story of how railroads were mostly struggling due to competition from trucks while Western Class 1s remained unaffected, I have to highlight how much of an absolute pain in the neck it was to actually find the original engine for this machine. First, I started off by finding no serial number or previous numbers for the engine on our picture archives, with some descriptions stating the machine was a U30 while others claimed it was an XPN C30-7. Then I consulted Railroad.net, who suggested one of the same two classes based on the two trucks, but leaned more towards the latter. Next, I looked through the entire roster of BN C30-7s and ruled out which ones were not seen before 1999 by also checking for photos on them on Flickr and our picture archives. And then I started looking at general pictures of C30-7s to try to identify which models had these same mixed trucks as 2100, until a bunch of random Google searches finally led me to a website that showcased the one and only engine that NLLX 2100 was converted from. Santa Fe 8121 was built in June of 1980 as part of the 8099 class, also known as the Santa Fe's fourth batch of 157 GE C30-7s, as they purchased the third largest amount of C30s of the over 1,000 engines produced in the same class. Like many other larger railroads at the time, the C30-7 was purchased in large numbers as it was the newest class that General Electric had to offer in 6-axle mainline road freight diesels in the face of competition against CMD. This particular class marked the true beginning of GE's reputation in the locomotive builder market as it brought forth the introduction of the Dash 7 series as a worthy successor to the U series. Built towards the middle of the C30 orders, 8121 could be found anywhere along the Santa Fe mainline between Chicago and Los Angeles, usually hauling a wide variety of mainline fast freights across the southwestern desert with several other GE and EMD models. But like many engines that used to work on Class 1s, their post-Class 1 career becomes much more unique and interesting. After leading an unnoteworthy life on the Santa Fe, the C30-7s would be integrated into BNSF when the Santa Fe merged with the Burlington Northern in September of 1995, where they would be briefly renumbered, but soon seen as surplus and sold off to several other operators in the face of newer 6-axle road power from GE. In the case of 8121, the engine was renumbered to 5164 to avoid a numbering conflict, but the engine was retired just 4 months later in January 1996, where it was sold to Livingston Rebuild Center and numbered LRCX 8121 for leasing service, along with several other ex-Santa Fe C30s, as they were even painted in a livery similar to the blue and yellow that they previously wore. As these leasers were officially leased by Class 1s, 8121 was leased by the Ferrocarriles Nacionales de Mexico, or FNM, for freight service on the National Railway of Mexico, before they too would be shortly dissolved in 1998, as the railroad was privatized and was no longer the operator of its railway routes, thus leaving 8121 dormant and without an owner once again. But as the engine was returned to its leasing base in Livingston, Montana, a small contracting firm nearby would completely change the face of this otherwise common engine. As luck would have it, this particular engine's fate was staged by something larger than the railroad it worked on, namely an ongoing current event that was considered brand new at the time. You know it, I know it, you're using it right now, and it's also the very reason as to how we know about this engine's existence: the Internet. With the widespread availability of the World Wide Web in the mid-90s, everyone and everything was switching its communication systems from analog-based to digital, which required the installation of fiber optic cables to better connect several places around the world. Not to be left out of the fiber optic bandwagon, railroads across North America also started a massive undertaking of installing fiber optic cables along their right-of-ways in order to further improve signal, radio, and dispatching communications, as well as hosting other non-rail related utility lines along their right-of-ways, since they provided for straight clear alignments to bury utilities. Likewise, many railroads and independent companies started developing specialized equipment that carried and buried brand new fiber optic cables right next to the tracks, and one of these smaller companies was Northern Line Layers, based in Billings, Montana. But instead of purchasing and modifying another freight car for cable laying needs, they looked a few towns west at surplus C30s, and the engine they purchased was number 8121, as they bought it to their shops in 1998 and gave it one of the most extreme rebuilds ever given to a locomotive in railroading history. During this rebuild, everything above the frame was completely stripped and was given a cable holder, a crew cab, a mountain cable plow on each side, and a generator in the back, as it was painted orange and white, number 2100, possibly to represent the upcoming 21st century, and was given the name Clyde above its coupler. Since 2100 is arguably the most important piece of a fiber optic cable laying train, since it's a machine that actually places the cable in the ground, 2100 was almost immediately utilized to lay several cable lines across the country, most notably in the South, where it was most photographed. Specifically, 2100 was almost exclusively used by Quest, who, in a nutshell, recently split off from Southern Pacific's construction division after their merger with Union Pacific in 1997, as they were contracted to lay fiber optic cables by CSX, NS, and other nearby short lines. Most photos of 2100 in service were taken behind SBCX GP7s with Quest logos on them, but the same fiber optic train was also seen behind CSX MOW Jeeps and notably Bayline GP38s, since most photos of 2100 were taken when this train was near the Bayline's main line along the Florida Panhandle. Despite its large size, its purpose and function is actually pretty simple, in which cables were fed from the flat cars behind it as they were sent through the cable holder and through the plow, where the plow would be lowered 5 feet into the ground and the rest of the train would be pulled at a slow speed, with most personnel on board simply watching over the machine to make sure everything ran smoothly, and to occasionally stop the train to reload new fiber optic cables. But as unusual as a chapter this is for this engine, it also wouldn't last for long, as Northern Line Layers would merge with Quanta Services in March 1999, and 2100 and the rolling stock used for the fiber optic train used in the South was sold to the Ohio Central Railroad the same year, where photos revealed that there was in fact a second identical cable plow car that was numbered 2200, which was originally Burlington Northern U30C number 5325, which also explains the assumption of 2100 being an XBN U30 earlier. Yet, while the Jeeps from the cable train were purchased by Ohio Central and were utilized for local duties, there is practically no footage of 2100 after being stored in Ohio, since at the time, most fiber optic cables were already laid across most of the country, and the Ohio Central, which rendered most cable laying equipment unwanted. As the case for the NLLX layers was made especially worse since their 6-axle bases made them heavier when compared to other cable layers. Sadly, this is where most traces of the unusual railcar end, as only one photo of 2100 on the Ohio Central is known to exist, so as of when this video was made, I hereby declare NLLX 2100 and 2200 to have an unknown disposition. Yet, despite the few photos of this engine, it still led an eventful life within the span of its last few years of service, as its story has been mostly unnoticed until now. Maybe that's why there are so few photos of this engine's career to begin with, as it easily blended in with other engines in the same class as it was constantly moving from one place to another. But no matter how uninteresting something may look, every piece of equipment is living through its own unique service life, and sometimes the most generic engine ends up as the most unique for the most unexpected reasons. You just never know what life has in store that way. Thank you all for watching this episode, as this has been one of the hardest to research, ranging from finding enough photos of Dissension, info about its origins, as well as info on the companies that use them. As you might have noticed, I'm trying to change up a few things as to how this series and others are presented, starting off with a parody of the famous Pickle Rick meme from Rick and Morty. I personally haven't watched the show, but it was the first thing that I thought of when I first saw Dissension, and I'd like to see if I can include prologues before the official start of the episode to properly introduce an engine, with some having a more lighthearted tone, while others can be more serious and cinematic. Before we wrap up, I'd like to give a special shout out to the Frick Lines Instagram page, as it covers several current events in railroading news and showcases several non-photoshopped photos of unusual instances in railroading history, as it's how I found out about 2100, along with several other railroad oddities. Link in the description. With that said, please let me know what you think of the new editing style, whether you like the little prologue or not. If not, that's fine as well, since I know not everyone is a fan of that particular show. I just tried to start off with something unexpected to bring forth a new style for the channel. Thank you again for watching. Credit for all the photos used go to their respective photographers, and if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Have a good day.